I don't think you go to school to be a therapist. I think you're born as one.
Behind the scenes, what are we as therapists talking about?
The idea isn't what you do, but why do you do it?
The why is almost always more interesting than the what.
That's the unsaid thing.
Oh, I'm saying it. I'm going there. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Insights and Actions podcast. We got Matt Christian, the man, the myth, the legend. We got Craig James,
right.
one of our co-founders. And every now and then people call me Dr. Johnny, and I have to remind them, don't call me Doctor. Johnny Pierce. Let's get into it.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
That's right.
Were you clapping?
It was a clap for Johnny, but
Not the doctor part.
Yeah.
But yes, we did a Buzzwords Part 1 not too long ago, and we think that was worthy of doing a Buzzwords Part 2. So here we are to buzz again in your ear with words you've heard, but probably not understood.
heard a lot, I'm sure. Yeah, I heard a lot. Cool. Well, let's get into it. Johnny, you had one you wanted to start with, right?
Yeah, I thought we were being a little cheesy when we got the little balls of paper out of the little thing we had. So we're just picking words that
It's
we really want to
production
talk
value,
about.
Johnny.
I know. But safety.
As if I don't have feelings. Go.
Safety is the word.
The University of Chicago has sent a letter to its new students saying it doesn't support safe spaces or trigger warnings.
Good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for
The
failure.
things that you're doing to try and manage your anxiety, really making your anxiety worse.
Obviously, it is a very popular word in the world of psychology. It's become a popular word on college campuses and in schools. Naturally, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think that the version of it that we're going to be talking about it's gotten a little polluted. So when you hear the word safety, Craig, what comes to mind for you in the context of what we're talking about from a buzzword standpoint?
The positive or the negative?
Either way, go with it.
It's interesting because safety means threat. Was connected to the word threat. And so when clients or individuals talk about needing a safe space or this is not safe, a lot of it is you're using the word, but what does it really mean? What's the context of it? I think the pendulum swings back and forth. It doesn't really stay in the middle. So when I hear safety, I'm like, there are no safe spaces. What are you talking about?
Not really.
Right? We talked about this earlier, which is when you highlight the idea of a safe space, you actually create more threats. Because everything, you don't do this because these aren't safe spaces. This isn't safe. What I'm saying to the individual is you're not able to handle what's about to come to you. So we don't even, I can go deeper, but that's what I hear.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point about framing the impact of how we frame things in our mind. And when we give something a label or lay a concept of safety over something, then it automatically creates its opposite. The duality
almost definitely.
of it. And so now there's threat, and now I'm scanning for threat in the environment. And so what we're talking about in this sense, you're talking about is like a concept of safety that's been kind of bastardized or the concept has crept so far that it incorporates all of these things that aren't really, I think, what would traditionally be thought of as safety.
Right.
Maybe for better or worse, maybe there's some context where that's a helpful idea. I don't know, but I think it exacerbates a lot of things like anxiety in it, but we can talk about it.
Yeah, like I think that there's space to have awareness. I think that we've gone beyond the step of awareness into we must be safe at all times when that is an impossible task. Safety, I've always kind of seen it this way, and I work with my clients on this. I'm like, hey, safety is an illusion. Your concept of being safe is really up to you. So when you're driving in your car, are you safer than you are when you're in the airplane? Well, technically speaking, you're safer in the airplane because airplane crashes happen far less often than car crashes. Now, the lethality of it may be different and the spectacle of it may be different. I mean, if they did a news report every time a plane landed, nobody would watch the news. They only report the crashes. They only report the failures. But I drive in the DMV. You guys drive in the DMV. I've literally seen cars engulfed in flames. And I've seen them multiple times. I've been living here for 3 years now. Like, this is a normal occurrence here. But you see it often enough.
I'm going out.
Listen, you see it often enough, and it's just something that's like, oh, there goes a car on fire. And you just keep driving because it happens often enough. I see car crashes like almost every week.
Jeez, John.
Yeah.
Like Johnny's out there cutting people off. This seems like
No.
more than a coincidence.
Indy.
I
Indy
see it all the
500.
time. Like I'm on the roads quite
Somehow,
often.
every time I drive, there's car accidents all around.
Hey, it is what it
They're
is.
usually behind me.
It is what it is. Like unless I'm driving really late at night or really early in the morning, I see 2 or 3 people standing on the side of the road looking at the damage of their cars, and it's just like because it happens so often. Of course, it's not as lethal. Then it becomes a part of life, and ultimately these things around safety. So. Okay, we got to be careful what literature we expose people to. We got to be careful how we phrase different things because we got to say it just right or we're going to offend or we're going to trigger somebody. That makes the whole process of living so much more challenging. It's not to say don't be aware, because I can be aware of the fact that I don't know what's going on with that other person. So let me be mindful, which I think we're going to touch on later. I can understand that when I leave my home, I've increased the risk of having some negative interaction with the world around me. But if I'm preoccupied with that negative interaction with the world around me, then I look at the world as this incredibly dangerous place that maybe I shouldn't frequent.
Mm-hmm. Which creates isolation. You said it a second ago, which I liked, was scanning everything. So looking for the threat, which increases anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being aware is one thing. When it's about safety, you're always constantly scanning, looking for it. Right?
It's a preoccupation.
Preoccupation. So now your anxiety is through the roof.
Right.
And if you're anxious, depends on who's in your network. Are you a parent or your child? So now everybody's affected because somebody told you, you heard this idea, you saw a podcast or some therapist was talking about safety. Like, what does it mean?
And I think the point with that, so scanning the environment, how it connects with anxiety specifically, because it's really viewing things in that way is it's kind of perpetuating the cycle of anxiety. Really, the thing that for the most part is fueling anxiety or fueling ongoing, really entrenched anxiety is are these avoidance behaviors that are happening. So if everything's framed in, I need to be safe, and so my psychological well-being, my emotional well-being is based on an elimination of risk, then it gets into where it's like, I'm trying to find well-being through avoidance, which is the very thing that creates more anxiety.
Right. It's a log on the fire.
And it's kind of like the fragility or anti-fragility idea we had talked before and everything, where it's like, it's kind of teaching people these cognitive distortions like in CBT that we're trying to, help people to eliminate. But then there's also with that anti-fragility thing, there are certain things that can be really damaging and break a person, like actual kind of, abuse, all kinds of different types of abuse or neglect, or things where safety really is a very central, important thing. People living in unsafe environments that has really big impacts on their nervous system and everything. So that's like, it's like that, but then they try to...
Well, we've trained people's nervous systems to react to seemingly common experiences in this extreme way because we've made it seem as though having those basic experiences need not happen.
It's almost like, when we hear the word trauma, you got big T and little T.
Yeah.
What if we have big S and little s?
Yeah.
Real safety and, yeah.
Or we could just say BS because ultimately it becomes BS.
I feel like Craig lobbed that one over the plate for Johnny.
But yeah, so ultimately it ends up becoming BS because we have framed things as unsafe. So the goal becomes to become safe. And as a result, you start to move less and less. Life demands movement.
What do y'all think about something in other contexts of safety or like ways that I'll use it? Sometimes when I'm talking with clients, I'll use the idea of safety or talk about safety like in terms of a relationship, of feeling safe in the relationship, particularly when there's like some kind of trauma background or like real like attachment issues that are there. So we'll use that concept of safety.
And that throws
in
a
those
log
cases.
on the fire. That throws a log on the fire. So like if I can be keenly aware of the fact that in your past, you had experiences where people maybe were not forthcoming with you, were not transparent, manipulative, and all those other things. If I start the process by saying, don't worry about me, I'm not like that, that system's like, wait, what? That's an odd thing to say. Why would you say that? Now I have to pay extra special attention to you to make sure you're not like that versus... hey, I understand that you've been through some things. I just like a chance for you to get to know me for who I am, interact with me based on who I am. So I'm not trying to overcome your past because I wasn't there for it. That's your task. It's up to you to figure out how to deal with the fact that in the past, someone other than me mistreated you. In your past, someone other than me lied to you.
Right. It's for the other person to
Right.
to work through.
Too
for sure.
often, I think that we hear the word trigger and we feel that the person who does the triggering is responsible for the coping that comes along with it. And it's like, no, not necessarily.
So I think though with so like safety in relationship, maybe someone has a trauma background, they get in relationships with someone and you know, when the person's pulling away in some way or perceived, it brings up these big rushes of fear or whatever.
Right.
So safety I'll use it in relation to a fear response that's happening where it's like I feel like I'm unsafe. You know, the feeling of a lack of safety that is the thing to be worked through. Not that I'm actually unsafe, but there's a feeling of lack of safety. But to our earlier point though, then the process with that is to work through and sit with that feeling,
distress, yes,
and then see the other person
not leave,
the other person not leave, rather than do more of the avoidance kind of thing of like, which is usually the part that this is working on. The stopping of this is what is starting to help the safety behaviors of like constantly getting reassurance from the person.
That becomes OCD.
So it's like the idea though isn't to try to make myself feel, to try to gain some external safety. It's to feel kind of more
secure
at peace with oneself through working through those things. But I'm trying to think of examples of how I've used safety in ways that aren't necessarily like the classic definitions of safety.
But I mean, we've been encouraged to.
Well, we've been encouraged to, but I think what we sometimes, those are buzzwords, right? Safety. What I learned when I did some couples training years ago, what's it code for? Right? We'll say, well, are you feeling safe in a relationship? Well, is it about safety in a relationship? It's about connection with the other person, connection with yourself. So those are buzzwords. What I'll sometimes ask is that code for something else?
Yeah.
Because I think how we use the term safety is intellectual. Right? In a non-clinical sense. Well, I need to be safe. That's
trying to talk about a
intellectual.
heart issue with a head approach.
Yes. We may need to start exploring, well, may or may not, what does safety really mean? What are you really asking for? And then we reality test the expectations, right? Because a lot of times you can say, I want to be safe here. Well, there may be a reason why, but we also may get to reality test it. So we get to push and figure out what it is, because the term, they may be using safety when it really means this.
Right.
Or something else. And so let's get to what it really means.
What do we actually mean
Yeah,
by what we're
what are
talking
we
about?
really talking about?
Because what is it? If
really
you ever
important.
do emotionally focused therapy for couples, EFT, it really talks about and highlights more times than not, we actually give a secondary response. We don't really get to the primary.
Right.
We use a lot of secondary responses for protection. Either we don't know how to go deeper or not, right? But that's really what it is.
Can you explain for people that what a secondary response is referring to?
An easy one is I'm angry, right? I'm going to show anger. I often will highlight at times anger is a secondary response because it's either fear, pain, or frustration. So instead of verbalizing my frustration, I'm just going to show you anger. And what's really nice about it is people respond to the anger, what you do, not why you do it. So it's a secondary response.
And it also moves you away from what's actually going on. So if my feelings are hurt and that's what I'm actually experiencing, if I say I'm hurt, you're probably actually either stop doing what you're doing if you have any kind of care or concern for me, but also you maybe come closer to me because you're like, oh no, I've hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt you, or whatever the case may be. But if I lead with I'm angry, that pushes you away. So I'm creating distance for safety when in fact I probably want you to come closer to me and to comfort me because I'm hurting. But the thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched on with this, because I recently listened to a podcast that actually a client, I can't say your name, of course, but thank you for letting me know about the Raising Parents podcast. It's worth checking out. Yeah, it's a really cool podcast.
I like the title.
Oh yeah, it's a really good podcast. But the person was talking about something we've talked about. They actually did interviews with multiple authors that we've read the books for around letting kids have time to themselves unsupervised so that they can develop. And the idea of safety and like how Amber Alerts and things of that nature and those high profile cases of children being abducted, it really changed the way parenting worked. Like kids don't walk to school anymore, even if they live down the street from it. And some parents are looking to become free range parents where they give their kids more freedom to go into their community and walk around, having more independence and autonomy. One lady got bashed because she had let her son ride the subway home in New York.
Yeah, I remember
And
that
like
shit.
he came home feeling really good about himself because he was able to get home successfully, and it became like a viral thing. All of this was around safety. This idea that children need to be monitored nonstop. And one of the things, the woman who's the podcast host, which forgive me, I don't have your name right now, but I'll have it by the end of this podcast. She said that child abductions happen at a rate of 0.003 to 0.004. So they are exceptionally rare. But because of the news coverage, much like the airplane crash, it becomes this persistent worry and fear that you take all these measures to guard against.
And I think, just real quick, Craig, of like, I think an important point with that too is, so then it's like, okay, well, maybe there's this really, really small chance of getting abducted or
Very
something.
faint.
And so, but it's like, all right, well, if I, eliminate all of that risk, that's still a good thing, quote unquote. But I think the key point is there's something being lost by doing that. There's something very important being lost. There's a big cost to doing that.
Right.
Of the building up, resiliency,
Resilience,
self-confidence.
Right.
The experiences people need to develop. But
Yeah, the point I was saying as you were sharing the story was, well, maybe the issue is safety. Maybe it's about community.
That was something that was talked about.
Right. Maybe what we're talking about is the absence of community where, at least in the suburbs, houses got bigger. People lost porches and went to gazebos and decks. So we got a
Backyards,
backyard.
I don't
So
see my neighbors anymore. I got a
Right.
big fence up, so I don't see what's going on with them. I don't interact with them.
So we're disconnected. We're all looking for connection ultimately.
yeah.
So maybe this issue of safety is really about connection. How do I get connected not just to my spouse, but my neighbors, my community?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Maybe that's really what we're talking about is how do we get reconnected and not feel like, how do we just get reconnected, period?
Yeah. And that was
Right.
the thing that
That's
was
it.
highlighted was that at some point in time in the past, and it was around the time when these kind of high profile child abduction cases happened, adults stopped trusting other adults. Because it used to be that, and I know I grew up in a community like this where the adults knew each other. And if one adult wasn't around and something was going on with their kid,
That's
they
right.
had the liberty to say something to the kid without worrying about how now the parent's going to react. Now, they didn't all parent the same and they didn't always focus on the same thing, but there was this kind of general consensus idea about how much monitoring the kids needed and when to step in and say, hey, stop doing that, and how to do it. And nowadays, you really don't want people talking to your kids. You really don't want to talk to I know I don't want to talk to somebody else's kids. I'm good. I'm going to keep on walking by with my kids. I love
wanna
my
talk to
kids.
someone else's kids.
But I'm not trying to deal with it. I don't know what your kids' frame of mind is. I don't know what they going to scream or yell. Heck, I'm a black man. I got to be careful about that. I live in an area where it's
funny
diversity.
because I usually, when I see parents and kids losing it in the store, I'll say to the parents, stay strong. We've always been there. We've all been there.
And just keep on walking.
No, but I think it's interesting. What if what we're looking at as safety is, I'd be interested if we could ever figure out all the topics we talk about in the buzzwords. There's probably a theme to all these buzzwords,
Oh, most definitely.
right? What's the underlying theme to everything we talk about? I don't know.
All right. So for the next word, Craig, you had something that you were going to mention. Can you explain what was the word that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, mine was neurodivergent.
Are you neurodivergent?
The neurodiversity movement, on the face of it, is very progressive.
So what is neurodiversity?
It's probably a term that it's been around for a while after doing a little bit of research. I think it was like 1998, Judy Singer. Mayo Clinic's got some literature on it, but it really just identifies how people's brains are different. Okay, yeah. But I've heard it a lot. It may not be out in the sphere of society, but around therapists, I just hear the word a lot. I'm like neurodivergent. I'm like, what does that mean? Right? And that's always been my thing. I'm a big believer in, I need to know your definition.
Yeah.
Because we all think differently. Right? I think
Well, you were reading me a definition of it that really, as soon as you said it, I was like, okay, so everybody's neurodivergent. So what was that?
Neurodivergent is a term used to describe people whose brains work differently.
That's a broad ass definition of something.
Really broad, right?
Yeah. Okay.
It's different than what's considered typical. But I'm like,
Well, what's typical?
And it goes into more, because I think it was talking about, where is it's like conditions and qualifications and classifications and qualifications. Somebody who has ADHD, somebody who has dyslexia. So those are neurodivergent brains and experiences. And I just hear it now across the board for everything. And I'm like, help me with that. Because I think as I thought about this more, the desire to not offend anybody offends everybody, right?
Ultimately.
Person-centered. What if we just called it what it was and not try to clean up the label? We all know what you're talking about. Well, that person's neurodivergent. Why? Well, because they were thinking this versus thinking that. I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah, because there's
think
no
based
one
on
size
my
fits all.
That's the nicest
Yeah.
way of putting it. when it's just Johnny and I talking about you, we'll just say it's neurodivergent. Yeah.
So that was it. I think I'm going to throw it out there. What's it mean? Because I'm not here to talk negatively about it. I'm just trying to understand it.
I've definitely had more conversations with people about it this year than I'd ever had before. And I find myself, when someone says someone's neurodivergent, I find myself wanting to ask the follow-up question, how? Because to say someone's neurodivergent doesn't actually give me any details about that person's experience. When you go the next step and you mention a diagnosis, if they have dyslexia or ADHD, now, okay, so that gives me a little bit more context for this person's experience of the world. Someone who's struggling with dyslexia, while they may be labeled the same as someone who has ADHD, they're having vastly different challenges that may come up over the course of an educational career, relationships, and so on. So if I'm struggling with dyslexia, that may show up in a romantic relationship, but it may not. Whereas if I'm struggling with ADHD, that can make me an unappealing partner to some people who have low tolerance for people who are kind of all over the place. So it's not just about a label. And this is part of the reason why I struggle with labels in general. Labels are only as good as they function. So if I have, and this is going to get a little controversial, but if I have 3 white substances on the table and they don't have labels on them, that could be sugar, that could be salt, and that could be something else.
I said there's only one way to find out. Let's have some real fun, fellas.
Now, labels in that situation might be pretty handy
Yeah, that'd
because,
be good.
you probably don't want salt on things that you want sugar on, and that other stuff might get us all in trouble. But in other cases, labels, they don't have much of a function other than to be a placeholder, and it's not very helpful.
Well, let's look at for a second, the other side of it, or in ways that it could be helpful, or what it's pointing to. Now, I don't know of the history of neurodivergence and where it comes from, and different ways it's used. I almost always hear it used in the context of autism, and also sometimes with ADHD some too.
Yeah.
Now, where I think, so it's okay, what's the point of the term? I think the point of the term is that there's a way that someone's brain works that is different than what the average, kind of
What
brain.
the expected brain is.
Yeah, what the typical, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but it's something that is more baked into, okay, this is how this person's brain works, rather than, I guess I'm trying to contrast it with something like
Circumstantial.
Yes, than something circumstantial like anxiety or something, where it's like a changing states that are happening, almost like the weather or something that's changing. And I think with neurodivergent, take autism, for example, and again, that's a very broad
thing in its own
category,
self,
broad
yeah.
category of things. But a lot of the difficulty from it comes from the mismatch of how society is built and structured, and the social interactions and rules of everything, and how the brain of an autistic person operates. So I think it's trying to get at that of there's not necessarily something inherently wrong with the brain working in this way.
Correct.
It shit is different.
But it's different, and there's a mismatch. Now, whether the term's ultimately helpful, I think that's kind of the spirit that it's meant in.
Yeah.
And I think all of our brains are different, but with a developmental, disability or whatever.
Yeah.
There's something different about that than the way your and I brain is different.
So
that
here's-
is a real thing,
It is. Here's where I think I wonder if as a profession we're hurting ourselves. We're labeling so much that those outside the profession can use it against us.
Always.
Prime example. I might say, hey, Matt's working with a client who has autism, neurodivergent. I'm a defense attorney. Say my client's narcissistic. He's neurodivergent. It can be used to benefit.
Yeah. Because when we make a box, when you make a box, then you have to come up with the parameters for the box. Mm-hmm. And when you make a box with such broad parameters, I mean, even the spectrum, people being on the spectrum, autistic spectrum, the longer that's gone on, the more people who've kind of got lumped in. And then you hear lay people or you hear people who are struggling with a circumstance say, I'm on the spectrum. And it's like, in some ways, now you're being somewhat disrespectful to people who are on the spectrum, who are dealing with it in a more profound way, maybe, or in a more clear way. And it's like, but at the same time, you kind of can make that claim, because if it's a spectrum, where does it start and where does it end?
I would say I beat this drum. I want us to help people, but I'm just always apprehensive about the labels. How does it help? How do we do it so that we don't pathologize people?
Yep. And that we don't normalize pathology.
And so perfect. And then we're not homogeneous, where everybody's the same, everything's the same.
Yep.
I say the individuality is a thing that makes us great.
Yep.
Trying to have all of us fit in a box to look a certain kind of way for somebody else's purpose, I think there's an inherent danger. Maybe I'm extra on that.
Well, it ends up in the normative thing, so heteronormative and anglonormative. You end up in these bigger boxes where a parameter has been set up ahead of time around cultural identity or some type of identity. You use SES, so upper middle class, the 1%, whatever the case may be. So you start getting into these other boxes, and within those boxes, there are certain rules that exclude others. Like, that's the purpose. Boxes exclude others, whether you like it or not. You put some people in the box, you're not putting other people in the box. They go in a different box. Well, what does it mean to be in that other box? What does it mean to be other? What does it mean to be marginalized? That's where we start getting into trouble a lot of times when we're having these discussions, because we don't want to marginalize anybody. We don't want to other anybody. We don't want anybody to not be captured by the idea or the spirit behind these labels that we come up with. But by creating the labels, we've naturally othered somebody. Like, that's just, when you say that Matt's a white man, I'm a black man, there's a difference here that we can note and notice, but we've given it meaning now, and so many consequences that come from it.
Yeah, and I mean, well, one thing that's interesting is I don't know like the statistics on it or whatever, but a lot of neurodivergent people, autistic people, actually prefer to be the label of autistic to neurodivergent. I don't know what the exact.
It probably better captures their experience.
But there is a thing where a lot of times I come up with these terms, and then the people that the terms are supposed to be helping reply don't really like them.
Well, that's the thing. Who's coming up with the terms? Are you representative of the community that you're speaking of? Have you talked to that community? One of my favorite classes I took while I was in my doctorate program was community psychology. And community psychology, the very first thing that you're supposed to do when you're a helper, you're going into an environment to be a help, is to go ask the people who you intend to help how you can help. We don't do that. I don't feel like we do a great job of that. We don't go to clients and ask them how I can help. We assume we can help. We get into our own, letters. We talked about everybody's got their letters, and this is my way of helping you, instead of it being, well, one, what is your experience of this thing? So if we are going to say you're on the spectrum, what is your experience of being on the spectrum? If you struggle with anxiety, ADHD, dyslexia, not every person that has dyslexia experiences it the same way.
Well, if you think about the professions as a whole, it's really more of an art than a science.
Gotta be.
We're pushing a scientific or medical approach to people, right? We're making it more logical, fitting into a box, versus the artistic side of we're all different, right? And so labels allow it to be, the word's escaping me. When I put a label on it, it's concrete. Whereas if I go, it could be this or it could be that, it is what we need it to be. there's an artistic flow to it, which allows us to get to a place where we're okay with whatever it is. Angel on this one, and because we're talking about being neurodivergent versus neurotypical, but there's a pressure in that affects our colleagues, so to speak. So I just brought up the term neurodivergent because
it's a really interesting one. Yeah, no, I hear it a lot. It could be, if used, in the wrong spirit, could be a great way to get out of.
It's dark, man. It is dark.
Because it's like, I'm sorry, honey. Like, I'm neurodivergent. I don't know.
I'll add this.
I might try that, actually. I'm sorry.
Don't do it, Matt.
Hey,
but,
I mean, no. I'll cut that out. I don't actually plan on doing it.
You can try. No. I would say try it. We've all met her. It ain't going.
I'll throw this out there, and I want us to kind of pivot to, because you had brought up another buzzword that you want to get into.
So, Matt, you've come up with a word or two that a buzzword.
Yeah, so for me, this is one that's close to the heart for me, which is mindfulness.
We love it.
Which, is our term we hear more often than mindfulness.
What the school calls a mindful moment.
So mindfulness. Okay. So before you even get out of bed.
You see how I do my makeup for work? Very demure, very mindful.
You know what I'm doing?
You're meditating.
You know what I'm really trying to do, though? Just trying to prevent from getting sick.
So the history of the term mindfulness is it comes from the Buddhist tradition. And again, so stop me if I'm going on too long, because I practice Buddhism myself. So this is something that's like really something I could talk a lot about. But so mindfulness, it's a translation of the Pali word sati, which has kind of the connotation of to remember or recollect, in the spirit of being able to hold something in one's mind, not lose track of what one is paying attention to, something like that. I guess a similar idea would be in like modern cognitive science, probably something like keeping something within one's working memory to not lose sight of it. And it's something that's a pretty key thing within the Buddhist tradition. It's one of the eightfold paths, which is right mindfulness. And the purpose of mindfulness practices and the quality of mindfulness, and what mindfulness is really referring to in the Buddhist tradition, is this seeing things clearly as they are, and as an avenue for insight, and an insight that will then lead one to a liberation from suffering. So it's kind of like one stabilizes one's mind, and other kind of practices, these like shamatha practices, which are these like kind of one-pointed concentration, and we use that stability of mind with these mindfulness skills to like really look in real time, experientially, what is like looking under the hood, what is happening moment by moment in my experience, looking closer and closer and closer, and see what is actually causing suffering, and then how do I reverse that process?
It's a tuning in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a tuning in, and it's a kind of discovery in a non-conceptual way. A direct discovery of what is my experience, and then how do I stop suffering. So
it's your experience, not the other person.
Right.
Yes.
You're curious about yourself. You are curious versus judgmental. You are open versus predetermined. This is the Eightfold Path. It's one of my many tattoos that I have. Although I do and very much believe in Christianity, I felt like Buddha, his effort was to understand how to live this life. I love a quote that some guy asked him, like, you never talked to us about the afterlife. And he said, I never said I would. Because that wasn't what he was focused on. He was trying to understand, why do we suffer? And what can we do about it? And we suffer because we desire, and we desire for things to be other than what they are. So that's why it's so important to have that mindfulness, to have that very much curiosity about the now and the self.
Yeah. And so it's both practices and kind of a quality of mind that's used to get at ultimately very deep truths that can be transformative into things like impermanence and the nature of suffering, or the dissatisfaction that come with some of the things Johnny was talking about, the pushing things away, the trying to cling on things that are impermanent, and then ultimately into like a realization of the nature of self, or not self,
right,
in the Buddhist tradition. But so then in terms of things coming to the West, and particularly with psychology and therapy,
cognitive psychology in particular, third wave CBT.
Exactly, and so in in the 1800s, like the late 1800s, more of Eastern ideas started coming. There were some of these initial translations of Buddhist texts and other Eastern texts. The very prominent psychologist William James and he's a very famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, in like the early 1900s, and he talks some about the introspective methods of Buddhism. Carl Jung is a very famous psychologist, was also influenced by Buddhist ideas. And Zen came in, and that influenced other, Carl Rogers, other psychologists. And then in the culture at large, coming to the 60s, particularly in the 70s with the beatniks and with people like, like Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, all these things. So it became Eastern thought became culturally significant, kind of the counterculture movements in the 60s and 70s. And then John Kabat-Zinn, when he made mindfulness-based stress reduction course, that is when the thing started becoming kind of bringing it into the medical field and seeing some of the benefits that can come from there. And then within the realm of therapy specifically is with what Johnny was talking about of these third wave cognitive behavioral therapies, particularly with dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and ACT, which is acceptance commitment therapy.
Love ACT therapy.
Yeah, I like it too. So some of these mindfulness practices and ideas have been rolled into those, and then also kind of made its way into culture at large. So that was the download
history
of some of the history. But what are your all's thoughts about the term mindfulness? I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous these days in sometimes weird ways. But
I think a lot of it is we talk about often. There's the origins of it make sense of how we do what we're trying to do. I think it just gets thrown out there as a term, and what doesn't always happen is the history, which is what you're giving. The history of how it got here and what it looks, not what it has to look like, but here's a conceptually, here's what it should look like.
Here's the context of like where it's, what it's part of.
I think that's the piece that gets missed. You need to do some mindfulness. What does that mean? Right? Yes, you need to do it, but why? Right? Because you ask the question, it's not about the other person or being judgmental. What's happening to me for me, and how do I sit in it? How do I regulate me? Not go, well, you triggered me.
Well, that's the thing. What is it doing for me is oftentimes the pushback that you get. So when you ask people about do they meditate, or you ask people about what their mindfulness practices might be, people are reluctant to journal, reluctant to meditate because, well, it doesn't do anything. It's like, well, what do you mean it doesn't do anything? Well, I don't feel better afterwards every time, or whatever the case is. It's like, what are the expectations? Because if you can actually couch the expectations better, which is you're not doing this to come out of it feeling zen. You're doing this to come out of it with a greater self-awareness, with a greater in tuneness with yourself. That's something that might help people move towards it without this kind of odd expectation that it's going to suddenly make everything better.
Because what that is process over outcome.
Man, process over outcome. That's what definitely got to go on a t-shirt.
Mindful. I mean, mindfulness, if I think about it from the context of what you described, we're talking about process. What's it do for me is an outcome.
Yep.
Right? Like you guys know, for about several years ago, I practiced yoga. And I did the really, really hot. I was competitive. But that hour and a half, it's a process. Stay in the room, run through the poses. You don't have to hold the pose. Do your best, what your body can do right now. And I will go back probably next year, but it was a process.
Yeah.
I love the process. It was peaceful. It was quiet, hour and a half. I know the poses, but I went in every session as if I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Being a part of the process, listening to my body. Where am I attuned in this moment? So, yeah.
And that I like what you're saying too, of like that going into it of, almost like as if this was your first time doing it. There's a concept, particularly in Zen Buddhism, that was brought into DBT of that
new mind
of beginner's mind is what I've heard it called in Zen Buddhism. But maybe it's new mind, something like that, where it's bringing that freshness to things, which is that's pretty cool. And I definitely take your point, Johnny, of what you're saying about like. Because I think this gets at the heart of what can sometimes get a little astray from it, at least astray in terms of the original purpose of the practice. Now, whether it's a good way to approach it or not, I don't know. But like this thing of like like I'm going to do some kind of, like, let's say a mindfulness meditation or some kind of incorporate mindfulness in some way. I'm going to do it to feel good. In a sense, it's not really mindfulness anymore at that point, because the whole rationale behind the practice is the letting go of or lessening the reactivity to each little thing we're experiencing.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I need to grasp onto this. I need to feel good, or I'm feeling.
You need an outcome, particular outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a painful sensation. I need to push that away. So if that becomes the purpose of it, it's really not in the spirit of what it's intended to do. I think a good analogy, I like the analogy, or probably more than analogy, of like addiction, where where it's like there's the craving for the substance, something that's really progressed with someone, and then the feeling that comes forward. So I need to keep getting more and more and more of that feeling. And then there's the come down or the withdrawal, where I got to make this feeling go away. This is really uncomfortable. By then doing the thing that makes, and then so you're stuck in this cycle.
Yeah.
And you're never going to, there's no winning the game of that cycle. You're never going to get enough of the drugs that if you take enough of it, well, then you'll feel good forever. But it's like, I got to make this feeling permanent. I got to make this well-being permanent. So I'll keep taking more. But then you get the opposite thing because it's impermanent.
Right.
And so it's like, what does one do? One has to kind of step outside of the whole game altogether, and then, find sobriety and hopefully work on ways to find well-being within sobriety. So it's like, you're not going to win that game. And I think on subtler and subtler levels, what the mindfulness and certainly Buddhist path is pointing to is like a way off of that wheel of suffering. So if we're using the mindfulness in a way of like, I gotta almost like,
we've essentially
like
transplanted it right back in there.
Yeah, like I'm going to use this almost as like a Xanax or something to do some kind of mindfulness practice. It kind of misses the boat some with that. But if it's helping someone to relax some or something, I'm not mad at that either. I don't know.
Well, what you're also adding to that, I can't, if I'm in distress today and I start mindfulness today, it's not going to work. Because it's not intended to be
it
when
not
you
quick
are.
fix kind of thing, yeah.
This is something.
This is a slow release medication.
And you're to commit to it every day.
Every day.
No matter what the world is telling you to do or what you feel. That's the piece with mindfulness is as I understand it, let's do something every day. Let's set aside time, the same time every day. We regulate our experiences because it could be, I felt nothing today, but I'm going to do it. But man, did it not trigger a thought or something from yesterday? Or I did it today and it helped me. It'll help me tomorrow. I don't know. Am I willing to develop a level of tolerance in distress?
Well, we've definitely drifted into a very necessary point, and I think it's a good point for us to kind of put a bow on our pod today.
Oh,
practice. Practice, 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 practice. We have a saying about practice makes perfect. And of course, that's been refined that perfect practice makes perfect. And all of that misses the point. Practice creates habits. Habits create lifestyles. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about doing something like mindfulness. That's actually what we're talking about when we're talking about looking at these labels and stepping back from them. Does this label actually enhance or enrich your life? Do these buzzwords that you hear make you understand anything at a deeper level? 9 times out of 10, they don't. They actually lead you to more confusion. You got more questions because you need more clarity. So when we're practicing how we communicate, when we're practicing how we live our lives, when we're practicing how we are well, we don't practice this in a way to get to this one outcome. So I must feel good is a outcome. It is an outcome that has to come and go. Wellness, when it works at its best, which of course we all know I talk about wellness all the time, is that I can be fine even when everything else is not fine. That tuning in the self, because I've tuned into myself, I am here in whatever conditions that I have. I am here with whatever feelings that I have. I am fully present and fully aware to the best of my ability. And I'm not judging that to then diminish myself further. I am simply attempting to keep going.
Well, I think what I'm adding to that is that the three of us have different trainings, right? Or phrases. Yours will be wellness. Matt talks a lot about mindfulness and the respect that we have for each position indirectly. And it's not let's just be respectful today in the moment. It's a respect over time. And that's what that's why this is authentic as it can be. right? 3 male clinicians, 3 males who are therapists talking about life experiences, our profession, and society as a whole. It's out of respect. I'm not trying to be too philosophical here.
Wait, man, we gotta have those
that's what
thoughts from time to time.
Yeah.